Hello and welcome to the next economics podcast for Pigott School A-level students. We're going to look at today price discrimination. The definition of price discrimination is charging a different price for the same good or service to different people. So it's got to be for the same service or the same product, but different people are getting different prices. We'll go through there are three different types of price discrimination, and we'll go through each individually. We'll look at some examples as we go through, so they become a bit more obvious. The first type of price discrimination is first degree price discrimination, which is where you can charge individual customers their maximum price. So what you're basically doing is taking away as much of the consumer surplus as the producer as possible. So instead of looking at an equilibrium price that most people would be happy to pay, you're looking at each individual customer and how much you can charge them. So eBays and auctions work like that. You are looking, only one customer gets the product that's on sale, and you're bidding up and up and up. You're eating into that consumer surplus, and that person gets an individual price. You might then sell a second one of a similar product, and it might not be the same price. Second-hand car dealerships, or if you've ever been to markets, so sort of souks in Morocco, they will do the same thing. So if a second-hand car dealer or a car dealership might look at you and say, right, I think that person can afford more, and they'll start off at a higher price than someone low. So equally, a Moroccan souk, tourists are going to start off with a higher price being charged to them than locals because they think that consumer surplus is higher. You've then got second-degree price discrimination. So second-degree price discrimination is a different price based on the quantity bought. So the most obvious examples of this are if you go to supermarkets and you see buy one, get one free, commonly known as bog off, or if you see buy two, get third free, buy two, get third half price, that kind of thing. So it's the same good. You're buying the same good, 3 tins of baked beans, but that third one is priced less. So that's where the price discrimination comes in. The third type of price discrimination is third degree price discrimination. And this is probably the most common one, or the one you'll be most familiar with. This is where firms are able to segment or split the market up, usually into different times, but it could be different times, different areas, and then charge people or individuals more in that bracket. So the two best examples for these are firstly cinemas. So cinemas have got price discrimination down to a great art. The product obviously is essentially watching the film. So it's the same product to whoever it is, but it would be a different price if you are a student. It's a different price if you're a student at university compared to an adult. It's a different price even from that student to young kids. So to watch the same film, kids, teenagers and adults all paying a different price. Also with cinemas, they've got it down to a fine art on different times of day. So if you go to the cinema at sort of 10 a.m. on a weekday, it's about £3-4. It costs very little. Then they're looking at Friday nights, Saturday nights. It's probably about £15 now. So the time that they've done it by age in cinemas, and they've also done it via time of day, and they've done it very successfully. So they've eked out that consumer surplus. They've eked out more customers. The other good example of third degree price discrimination are trains. So trains are probably the most common one that do third degree price discrimination very successfully. If you go onto National Rail website, the Trainline website, and look at the cost of a train from Reading to London return at any time before 9:30 on a weekday, it's about £50. If it ticks over to 9:33 or times after the rush hour, then it goes down to about £17. So there's a huge difference between those peak and off-peak times for trains. So trains have done it largely on times. And the reason they can do that, which we'll get back to in a second, is because of the elasticities of demand being different. So as well as the definition of price discrimination being charging different consumers a different price for the same good or service, there are some criteria that need to be filled for price discrimination for companies to be able to conduct price discrimination. The first one, as I've mentioned, is that the customers must have different elasticities. Basically, you're looking at some customers having a more inelastic demand than others. So in the two examples I've used for third degree price discrimination, obviously people trying to get to work before 9:30 in the rush hour, they've got a very inelastic demand. They've got to be in work at a certain time, so they will be charged more. Off-peak rail travel after 9:30, weekends, they will have substitutes. They don't have to go to these places a lot of times, so their demand will be more elastic. So as well as those differing elasticities, and in cinemas, time off on Saturdays, films come out on Fridays, so the demand there is going to be more inelastic. As well as these differing elasticities between more inelastic compared to elastic, it is also important to be able to split these markets up. So in cinemas and trains, they've done it via time. This is important for the next point, because the next point is to prevent resale, or it might be called seepage. So if you can buy a ticket for off-peak and then try and use it for on-peak, then the price discrimination hasn't worked. That's resale. So there, obviously, the barrier comes in and the ticket inspector comes in. Football turnstiles used to be a man or woman behind the desk looking at your ticket. Now you look at football tickets, if you've got pensioner tickets, kids tickets are cheaper with an electronic scanning machine. Quite often you can get away with reselling. So you could sell it to get an OAP ticket that's cheaper and sell it on to a full-priced adult. So you've got to be able to prevent that resale sometimes, which is usually through some sort of barrier or checking of tickets. And the company involved must also have some market power. So basically they've got to be an oligopoly or monopoly. They've got to be able to set price. If they didn't have some sort of market price setting power, they wouldn't be able to set prices at all. People would just go to their competitors. So if you think in the examples I've used, cinemas are usually local monopolies based on area, location. So View Cinema in Reading, they're a showcase, but that's quite a way out. If you're in the town centre, you've got to use it. It's a local monopoly. And trains, we already discussed when we looked at market structures, are most definitely, they have market power. They are a monopoly, so you haven't got an alternative. The most common diagram, or for third degree price discrimination you will use, you will have an average cost and marginal cost curve which is flat. This is assumed to be flat just for simplicity basically, but also the cost shouldn't change. So it's the same price. So if you're thinking whether an OAP, a child or an adult comes to sit at the cinema, the marginal cost of the cinema are the same. Same with the usage of train seats. So the marginal cost and average cost will be flat. You will, to show third degree price discrimination, you will have two separate diagrams. One of those diagrams will have average revenue and marginal revenue being very inelastic. So I would start quite high up on the Y on the left-hand side axis, start quite high up, and then it will go down steeply because it's inelastic. So that's showing obviously your peak travel or your Saturday night cinema. And then on the second diagram, to compare it to the secondary market, you will have an average revenue curve and marginal revenue curve that start still above the AC and MC curve, but a bit further down from the top, and they will be much shallower. So they will be showing a much more elastic demand. And what those two diagrams will show you, obviously shows you the price and output differences, but it will also show you the abnormal profit being made. A more abnormal profit will be made obviously via the inelastic peak travel. Okay, which is important for our next bit. So I would say price discrimination comes up as a 25-mark question, essay question, once every 3 or 4 years. And you're usually looking at a 15-mark question saying what are the conditions necessary for it. So that would be defining what it means, and then the different elasticities, market power, preventing resale, and then showing your diagrams. And the 25-mark question, again, once you simplify it, will be basically asking you, is price discrimination good or bad? So it will be the benefits and costs of price discrimination. It might be worded something along the lines of, do only producers benefit from price discrimination? Is it true that consumers always suffer from price discrimination? But however it's worded in your 25-mark question, obviously you need to give a balanced answer. It's essentially asking you good and bad things about price discrimination. So the good things about price discrimination, there are possibly more good things than you think. It is cheaper for some people, obviously. So currently as students, you are getting things cheaper than you will when adults. So that is obviously good for the consumers that are getting it. So it might also widen markets. So daytime cinema prices being very low might widen markets and enable people that might not normally come in. So it's cheaper for some and widens markets. As usual with the they're earning additional profit, these oligopolies and monopolies. So they might use this profit for research and development and for investment. So with those two things, as usual, you can argue back saying, well, they might not, they might just keep it for shareholders, but they might. The cross-subsidy argument. So with buses, for example, the buses in Reading cost different amounts, and it's £2 for the 17, £1.70 to get to Whitley, and that is often used to cross-subsidise. Same with trains. So the Reading to London line is incredibly expensive, but that will cross-subsidise other routes, i.e. the people that have to use that Reading-London line are being overcharged so that someone else maybe down in the West Country is being undercharged because that service might not be viable. So it's good for cross-subsidies. The obvious negatives are that it is more expensive for some, and it obviously lowers output. So your standard sort of argument saying that some people are going to suffer in fact of higher prices, and they're restricting output purposefully. So you only get a certain amount of trains at a certain time of day. Okay, so remember, price discrimination only for, you've got to have some market power, so only for oligopolies and monopolies. You will need to know first, second and third degree. You'll need to know how to draw the diagram, and the most likely question, aside from a potential multiple choice question, is the cost and benefit argument. So the good and bad sides of price discrimination.